Gordon Ramsay finally admits the one kitchen nightmares restaurant he still regrets is a shocking revelation that proves even the world's toughest chef can't shake the ghosts of certain culinary disasters. For years, Gordon Ramsay stood at the center of kitchen nightmares as a force of certainty, a chef whose sharp words and uncompromising standards were framed as the final lifeline for restaurants on the brink of collapse. Week after week, viewers watched him walk into broken kitchens, confront denial, strip away excuses, and push owners toward accountability. The message felt clear: if Gordon Ramsay showed up, there was still hope. But behind the shouting, the urgency, and the dramatic turnarounds, something far quieter was happening. Not every intervention ended with resolution. Not every story wrapped itself neatly once the cameras stopped rolling. Years later, Ramsay began to speak differently about that time, acknowledging that one restaurant stayed with him long after filming ended, not because of failure alone, but because of the human cost he could not undo. So when a chef known for certainty finally admits regret, it raises an unsettling question. Which kitchen nightmares restaurant still weighs on Gordon Ramsay? And why has it stayed with him all these years? Before Gordon Ramsay became a global figure known for sharp words and fiery kitchens, his life was defined by discipline learned the hard way. He did not arrive at excellence through talent alone. He arrived through pressure, fear of failure, and an almost relentless refusal to accept mediocrity. Those early years shaped not only the chef he became, but the standard he would later demand from everyone who stood across from him in a struggling kitchen. Gordon Ramsay was born in 1966 in Johnstone, Scotland, and his childhood was marked by instability and hardship. His family moved frequently, chasing work and opportunity, never quite settling. Ramsay has spoken openly about a difficult home environment, one that pushed him toward structure as a form of survival. At first, that structure came through football. He trained seriously as a young athlete and believed the sport would be his future. When a knee injury ended that dream, he faced an unfamiliar and terrifying question. Who was he without the one path he had prepared for? The kitchen became his second chance. Ramsay entered the culinary world, not with romantic ideals but with urgency. Cooking was not a hobby, it was a lifeline. He trained at North Oxfordshire Technical College, then moved through kitchens that demanded precision and endurance. The work was grueling. The hours were long. Mistakes were not tolerated. Yet something inside him responded to that intensity. Order replaced chaos. Standards replaced uncertainty. His formative years under Marco Pierre White would define him permanently. White was known for uncompromising expectations and emotional pressure. In those kitchens, Ramsay learned that excellence came at a cost. He absorbed lessons about control, leadership, and the weight of responsibility that comes with commanding a brigade. Every service mattered. Every plate represented reputation. Ramsay did not just learn how to cook, he learned how failure felt when it was public, immediate, and unforgiving. That environment shaped his relationship with perfection. Ramsay came to believe that standards were not cruelty but care. Allowing someone to serve bad food meant allowing them to fail publicly. To him, honesty became a form of respect. Precision became a moral obligation. This belief would later define his television persona. Though long before cameras arrived, it was already deeply rooted. By the time he earned his first Michelin star at Aubergine in London, Ramsay had internalized a worldview built on pressure and accountability. Success did not bring ease. It brought responsibility. When he opened restaurant Gordon Ramsay in Chelsea and earned 3 Michelin stars, the achievement confirmed something he already believed. Excellence was fragile. It had to be protected relentlessly. These early experiences created a man who saw kitchens as ecosystems. One weak link could collapse everything. One careless decision could ruin livelihoods. Ramsay did not separate food from people. A failing restaurant meant staff losing jobs, families losing income, owners losing identity. That awareness never left him. This is the Gordon Ramsay who existed before kitchen nightmares. A chef shaped by loss, discipline, and an unshakable belief that standards mattered because people mattered. He carried those convictions into every room he entered. He expected resilience because he had survived it himself. He demanded accountability because he had lived without safety nets. Long before he raised his voice on television, he had learned that chaos thrives where leadership falters. And long before regret entered the conversation, he had already built the framework that would make it possible. When kitchen nightmares first entered Gordon Ramsay's life, it was not born from spectacle, it came from concern. By the early 2000s, Ramsay had already seen what happened behind the doors of failing restaurants long before television crews arrived. He had walked into kitchens where morale had collapsed, standards had slipped, and owners were drowning quietly while pretending everything was fine. The idea behind the show was simple, almost modest. If people could see the truth of what was happening, perhaps change would become possible. The original Kitchen Nightmares began in the United Kingdom, rooted in observation rather than confrontation. Ramsay entered restaurants not as a celebrity, but as a working chef with experience in recovery and rescue. He listened before he spoke. He tasted before he judged. The cameras followed, but they did not lead. What mattered most was understanding why a business was failing, not simply pointing out that it was. Many of the early episodes moved slowly, allowing viewers to sit with uncomfortable truths. Owners were exhausted. Chefs were overwhelmed. Families were fractured by the pressure of keeping doors open while debt grew heavier by the day. Ramsay approached these kitchens with urgency, but also empathy. He understood the humiliation of public failure. He knew how deeply identity is tied to craft, especially when food becomes a legacy passed through generations. In those early seasons, his frustration came not from anger, but from watching people sabotage themselves out of fear. Menus were too large because owners were afraid to let go. Kitchens were chaotic because leadership had dissolved. Dining rooms were empty because no one wanted to admit the experience no longer worked. When the American version of Kitchen Nightmares launched in 2007, the scale changed dramatically. The restaurants were larger, the personalities were louder, the stakes were higher. Ramsay's role shifted from quiet consultant to visible catalyst. Television demanded pace. Audiences wanted resolution. The emotional temperature rose. Ramsay adapted, but the core of his mission remained the same: save the business. Save the people inside it. Behind the intensity, there was structure. Every visit followed a rhythm. Observe the service, taste the food, identify the breakdown, confront the resistance, rebuild systems, restore pride. Ramsay believed consistency created safety. Once chaos was reduced, confidence could return. This method worked often enough to reinforce his belief in it. Yet the show was never just about food. It was about denial. Many owners had stopped listening long before Ramsay arrived. They blamed staff. They blamed customers. They blamed location. What they avoided was responsibility. Ramsay's most difficult task was breaking through that wall without destroying the person behind it. As the series grew more popular, the pressure intensified. Each episode compressed weeks of intervention into days. Cameras captured moments of collapse alongside moments of clarity. Some restaurants rebounded. Others struggled again after filming ended. Ramsay understood that transformation could not be guaranteed. He offered tools, not miracles. Still, Kitchen Nightmares became a phenomenon because it exposed something deeply human. People cling to failing dreams longer than they should because letting go feels like losing themselves. Ramsay saw that pattern again and again. It shaped how he spoke. It shaped how hard he pushed. It shaped the urgency in his voice. This chapter of his career turned a chef into a public figure with influence far beyond the kitchen. It also planted the seeds of reflection that would come later. Because while many restaurants were saved, one experience would stay with him in a different way. And years later, when he finally acknowledged it, The reason would have nothing to do with ratings or criticism. It would have everything to do with responsibility. As Kitchen Nightmares expanded, the success of the show brought Gordon Ramsay into a complicated space between intention and consequence. What began as a mission to help struggling restaurants evolved into a cultural force that reshaped how failure, leadership, and accountability were portrayed on television. With each new season, the highs grew higher, but the emotional cost deepened in ways that were not always visible on screen. The victories were undeniable. Viewers watched kitchens transform from chaos into calm. Menus were simplified. Dining rooms filled again. Owners cried with relief when customers returned. For many restaurants, Ramsay's intervention became a turning point that restored confidence and stability. These moments fueled his belief that confrontation, when paired with clarity, could save livelihoods. They also reinforced the public image of Ramsay as a relentless but effective force for change. Yet beneath those triumphs lived a quieter reality. The show compressed time, emotion, and responsibility into a format that demanded resolution within days. Real businesses, however, do not heal that quickly. Ramsay knew this. He often spoke about the limitations of what could be accomplished in a short window, especially when deep-rooted personal issues shaped the dysfunction of a restaurant. Addiction, family conflict, debt, and burnout could not be erased by a redesigned menu or a renovated dining room. As the American version gained momentum, the tone sharpened, arguments became louder, resistance became more dramatic. Ramsay's frustration, though grounded in professional standards, was increasingly framed as spectacle. The cameras captured raised voices more easily than quiet breakthroughs. Audiences responded to intensity, and the format followed suit. Ramsay adapted again, but he remained aware that the loudest moments were not always the most meaningful ones. The emotional toll extended beyond the owners. Staff members carried their own fears. Many were caught between loyalty to failing leadership and the hope that change might finally come. Ramsay saw cooks who had lost pride in their work, servers exhausted by empty dining rooms, managers trapped between survival and integrity. While the show highlighted confrontation, Ramsay privately acknowledged the vulnerability beneath it. These were people watching their dreams collapse under fluorescent lights. Over time, Ramsay began to recognize a pattern that unsettled him. Some restaurants rebounded only briefly. Others closed despite the intervention. Viewers assumed success was guaranteed because the show presented a clear arc. Ramsay knew the truth was far messier. He had entered spaces where the odds were already stacked too heavily against recovery. In those cases, his presence became a moment of hope rather than a lasting solution. This awareness did not diminish his commitment, but it altered how he carried it. Ramsay became more reflective about responsibility. He questioned how much change could be expected from individuals already overwhelmed. He considered the weight of exposure, of placing private struggles in the public eye. He understood that while television thrived on resolution, real life often continued in fragments. The highs of Kitchen Nightmares were real. So were the lows. Ramsay carried both with him. Each episode left an imprint, but some lingered longer than others, not because of failure alone, but because of the complexity involved. There were moments when he pushed hard and wondered later if compassion should have led instead, moments when urgency collided with humanity. These reflections did not surface immediately. They gathered quietly over years of experience, and eventually one restaurant would emerge from that accumulation, standing apart from the rest. Not as a spectacle, but as a reminder that intervention carries responsibility long after the cameras stop rolling. There is one restaurant Gordon Ramsay carries differently than all the others. It is not because it failed more publicly, or because the confrontation was louder, or because the footage became iconic. It lingers because it taught him something he did not fully understand at the time. Years later, when he finally spoke about regret, this was the place that came back to him with clarity and weight. The restaurant was Amy's Baking Company in Scottsdale, Arizona, featured during the 6th season of Kitchen Nightmares in 2013. On the surface, it appeared like many others that had come before it. A struggling business, a defensive owner, mounting online criticism. Ramsay entered believing the usual tools might still work. He expected resistance. He expected tension. What he encountered instead was something far more unmovable. From the first moments inside the kitchen, communication broke down. Amy Buzaglo and her husband Sammy rejected feedback outright. Staff members appeared fearful. Orders were mishandled. Accountability shifted constantly. Ramsay recognized quickly that the issue was not food alone, nor even management, but a closed system where no correction was allowed to land. Every attempt to help was met with hostility or denial. For the first time in the show's history, Ramsay walked away without completing the intervention. He explained on camera that the restaurant was beyond help because the owners were unwilling to change. It was a moment that shocked viewers, not because of anger but because of finality. The show had never ended that way before. What followed intensified the situation. After the episode aired, Amy's baking company became the focus of intense online attention. Social media backlash escalated rapidly. Posts attributed to the owners fueled the fire. The restaurant closed later that year. For viewers, it became a cautionary tale. For Ramsay, it became something heavier. Years later, Ramsay acknowledged that this episode stayed with him more than any other. Not because he believed he handled it incorrectly, but because he recognized the limits of the format. He has said that he regretted how exposed the situation became afterward, how the aftermath spiraled beyond anything he could control. The show was meant to help, but in this case it became a catalyst for something far harsher. The regret was not about confrontation. It was about consequence. Ramsay understood that television amplifies everything it touches. In this instance, amplification collided with fragility. The restaurant owners were unprepared for the scale of public reaction. Ramsay had stepped into a situation that required boundaries he could not enforce once the episode aired. This realization reshaped how he approached the show in later years. He became more selective. He paid closer attention to emotional readiness, not just culinary failure. He understood that some restaurants were failing not because of poor systems, but because of deeper personal fractures that television could not repair. Amy's baking company marked the point where Ramsay fully accepted that not every problem could be solved through pressure and clarity. Some required distance. Some required privacy. Some required walking away earlier than the format allowed. When he speaks about regret now, it is measured and reflective. He does not name the episode with anger. He names it with responsibility. It taught him that help must be received, not forced, and that exposure carries ethical weight. Among hundreds of restaurants, dozens of seasons, and countless success stories, this one remains singular. It stands as a reminder that even good intentions can leave lasting consequences, and that wisdom often arrives only after the cameras stop rolling. In the years that followed, Gordon Ramsay did not distance himself from Kitchen Nightmares. He carried it forward with more awareness, more restraint, and a clearer sense of responsibility. The show had given him reach, influence, and the ability to change lives for the better. But Amy's baking company remained the moment that reminded him influence has edges. By the time Kitchen Nightmares ended its original run in 2014, Ramsay had helped rescue dozens of restaurants. Some survived, some did not. What mattered to him more than ratings or viral moments was intention. The purpose was always restoration, never humiliation. Yet that episode forced him to confront how easily those lines could blur once millions of viewers entered the conversation. Ramsay later spoke about regret with unusual calm. He did not deny the facts of what happened on screen. He did not soften the behavior he encountered. Instead, he reflected on the aftermath. The speed of public reaction. The permanence of digital judgment. The way a single hour of television could define people forever. He acknowledged that the exposure went further than he ever intended, and that realization stayed with him. This awareness reshaped his approach to television moving forward. When Kitchen Nightmares returned in 2023, the tone was different. Ramsay focused more heavily on structure, communication, and sustainability. Confrontation still existed, but it served clarity rather than spectacle. The lessons learned years earlier guided every decision behind the scenes. He also spoke openly about boundaries. Some problems, he explained, cannot be fixed in front of cameras. Some situations require privacy, patience, and professional support beyond food and service. Amy's baking company showed him that when emotional readiness is absent, intervention becomes intrusion. That understanding altered how he evaluated each new restaurant. The regret he carries is quiet. It is not dramatic. It is rooted in responsibility. Ramsay understood that leadership means knowing when to step forward and when to step back. In that case, stepping back came too late to prevent the consequences that followed. Today, Kitchen Nightmares is remembered as one of the most impactful food series in television history. Ramsay remains proud of what it accomplished. Restaurants rebuilt, families reunited, communities restored. Yet among all those outcomes, one episode stands apart because it taught him something success never could. It taught him humility. It taught him that expertise does not grant control over outcomes once the world is watching. It taught him that helping requires consent, openness, and timing. And it taught him that regret does not always come from failure, but from realizing how much power you truly hold. When Gordon Ramsay reflects on that restaurant now, he does so without defensiveness. He acknowledges the lesson and carries it forward. That is why it remains with him, not as a mistake to erase, but as a reminder to lead with care. Among hundreds of kitchens, countless services, and years of television, one restaurant changed how he saw his role, and that shift, more than any viral moment, became the legacy that mattered most. In the end, Gordon Ramsay's regret is not about failure, nor about a restaurant that could not be saved. It is about awareness gained through experience, and the weight that comes with influence. Kitchen Nightmares was built on the idea that guidance, honesty, and hard work could turn struggling kitchens around. Most of the time, it did. But one moment reminded him that transformation cannot be forced, and that visibility carries consequences long after cameras stop rolling. That realization did not diminish his pride in the show. It deepened it. He learned where intervention helps, and where restraint protects. He learned that leadership sometimes means stepping back, even when the world expects confrontation. And he learned that regret, when acknowledged, can sharpen judgment rather than weaken it. What remains is a chef who continues to teach, mentor, and lead with greater care than before. Not defined by a single episode, but shaped by it. For more emotional stories, check out this video.